A cold silence filled the room. Inside us? June asked, his voice low. In very small amounts, Ji-hyun said quickly. The air filters June fixed are keeping new ones out. Our bodies are fighting them off, for now, but it means we cannot just plant a garden out there. She pointed to the door. The nanites in the soil would attack the roots. They would eat any new life we try to grow. Our little plant here is safe because it is in our clean air, in soil from our sealed packs. Min-soo felt his dream of a green world crumbling. He saw his plan to slowly expand their garden, to heal the land patch by patch turning to dust. So it is impossible? He asked, his voice hollow. No, Ji-hyun said firmly. It is just harder. We do not need to just rebuild. We need to cure the land first. We need to kill the nanites. She believed she could make a counter-agent, a computer program, a new set of instructions that could be sent to the nanites. It would tell them to stop replicating. It would tell them to break apart to become harmless dust. It was like a cure for a disease. But how do we give a whole planet medicine? June asked, practical as always. This was Min-soo's part. He had been thinking about this ever since the caretakers first explained the terraforming core. Their big machine had failed because it tried to fix the whole planet at once. It was like trying to heal a sick person by throwing them into a fire. We do not use a big wave, Min-soo said, an idea forming in his mind. He stood up and started drawing on the table with his finger, as if it were a map. The planet has an energy grid. The caretakers built it to power the terraforming. The core is the heart. The grid are the veins. The nanites are the sickness in the blood. He looked at them. We go to the heart, to the Genesis core. Ji-hyun uploads her cure into the core system. Then we do not just broadcast it everywhere. That would fail. The grid is too damaged. Instead, we make the core send the cure through the grid slowly. It will spread from the core through the veins, healing the land as it goes. It will be like cleaning a dirty floor, one tile at a time, starting from the corner. A controlled burn, but for healing, June said, understanding. Yes, Min-soo said. We performed surgery on the planet. The plan was terrifying. The Genesis core was thousands of kilometers away, across a dead and dangerous continent. But the alternative was to sit in their outpost, waiting for their filters to fail or for a large horde to break down their door. They had to try. They spent the next week preparing. June was in charge of transportation. He led them back to the ruins, this time in full daylight. They avoided the few remaining residuals and reached the wrecked vehicle Min-soo had seen. It was a small six-wheeled transport. It was crushed by the tower, but June believed he could salvage parts. He was an artist with machines. Using tools from his kit and parts from the outpost, he worked. He took the engine from the wreck. He took the wheels. He used metal from the walls to build a frame. Slowly in front of the outpost, a new vehicle took shape. It was ugly and boxy with a clear plastic windshield. June called it the Rover. It looked strong. Min-soo was in charge of supplies. He used all their remaining seed packs to grow as much food as possible in their sealed boxes. He packed water and made tools for digging and building. He also studied the maps on the outpost terminal, planning a route to the Genesis core. It was a long, dangerous path through canyons and dead forests. Ji-hyun worked on the cure. She used the outpost's computer, which was linked to the caretaker's knowledge. She wrote lines of code, creating a digital key that would fit the lock of the nanites' programming. It was delicate work. One mistake and the program might do nothing. Or it might make the nanites even more aggressive. One night she came to them, looking tired but happy. It is ready, she said, holding up a small data chip. The deactivation code. This is the medicine. They were as ready as they would ever be. The night before they were to leave, Min-soo stood looking at his lentil plant. It was no longer a sprout. It was a small, healthy plant with several green leaves. It was life. It was the reason they had to do this. He carefully dug it up, its roots clinging to a small ball of soil. He placed it in a clear container with a lid, making a small air hole. He would take it with them. It was their symbol. The next morning they loaded the rover. It was cramped, filled with supplies, water tanks, and tools. June got into the driver's seat. Min-soo sat next to him, the plant container on his lap. Ji-hyun sat in the back, the data chip safe in a pouch around her neck. June started the engine. It coughed and then rumbled to life. The sound was loud in the silent world. He turned the rover away from the safety of the outpost and pointed it towards the barren horizon. Towards the Genesis core, they did not look back. They drove forward into the Deadlands, 3 humans going to cure a sick world. The rover bounced and rattled across the cracked ground. The silence of the dead world was now filled with the sound of its engine, a brave, noisy protest against the stillness. Minsu held the plant container tightly on his lap, watching the green leaves tremble with each bump. It was a piece of their home, a reminder of what they were fighting for. The landscape was a painting of despair. They drove through fields of gray ash that puffed up in clouds around them. They passed forests of stone trees, their branches frozen in eternal agony. They saw the ruins of great cities, their white towers now broken teeth against the sickly orange sky. Nothing moved except the dust and the wind. June drove with a focused calm, his eyes constantly scanning the land ahead. Ji-hyun sat in the back, her scanner in her hand, watching for threats. "The nanite concentration is rising," she said after a few hours. "We are getting closer to a hotspot. We should go around." June nodded and turned the rover. They navigated around a hill and the scanner's readings slowly went down. Ji-hyun was their guide, finding the paths of least poison. The first real danger came from the sky. The weather here was broken. A storm appeared on the horizon, a wall of swirling green and black. It moved fast, acid rain, Ji-hyun shouted, reading the scanner. "We cannot be out in that." June pressed the accelerator. The rover groaned as it picked up speed. They needed shelter. Minsu saw a large opening in a cliff face ahead. "A cave! There! Go!" he yelled. They raced towards the cave as the first drops began to fall. The drops sizzled and smoked where they hit the ground. June drove the rover into the dark mouth of the cave just as the storm broke in full force behind them. They were safe. The sound of the acidic rain hitting the cave entrance was like frying oil. They waited for the storm to pass. The cave was dark and damp, but it was shelter. They ate a quiet meal, listening to the fury of the world outside. When the storm passed, they drove on. Days turned into a blur of driving, scanning, and hiding. They learned to work as a team. Minsu used his terraforming tool to find stable ground for the rover to cross. Once he used it to trigger a small rock slide to block a narrow pass that was filled with a large group of residuals. He was not fighting them. He was changing the landscape to avoid them. June kept the rover running. The rough terrain was hard on his machine. A tire went flat. He fixed it with a patch kit. The engine began to overheat. He found a dry riverbed and rigged a cooling system using a water ration and some pipes. He made things work. Ji-hyun was their eyes. She learned to predict the movements of the residuals. They were drawn to energy and sound. So when they had to pass near a large group, she had June turn off the engine. They would sit in silence waiting for the creatures to shammer away. She also found places she called dead zones, where the nanites were weak. In these places, they could stop and rest without fear of the air slowly killing them. One evening, in one of these dead zones, they saw something amazing. It was a small, tough-looking weed pushing through a crack in the rock. It was not green. It was a dull gray color, but it was alive. A native plant that had somehow survived. Ji-hyun scanned it. "The nanite level here is almost 0, she whispered. "This spot is clean. The planet is fighting back in small places." Minsu looked at the gray weed with a deep respect. It was a survivor just like them. He poured a little of their precious water at its roots. After many days, they saw it. On the horizon, a single magnificent spire piercing the clouds. It was made of a material that shone with a soft inner light even in the gloom. The Genesis core, it was still active. Its light was a beacon of hope. But between them and the spire was a vast, empty plain. And the plain was not empty. It was moving, thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, a sea of residuals, shambling and shifting around the base of the spire. It was the largest horde they had ever seen. "There is no way around," Ji-hyun said, her voice tight with fear. "The scanner shows the nanite concentration is maximum. This is the center of the sickness. We have to go through." They could not fight them all. It was impossible. Minsu studied the spire. He saw the main entrance, a great archway at the top of a wide staircase. The staircase was packed with creatures. They were not moving aimlessly here. They were standing almost like guards. One day the scanner picked up something else, a signal. A weak, repeating ping coming from a cluster of ruined structures about a kilometer away. The readout suggested it was a power source. Power meant tools. It meant lights. It meant maybe another working machine or even a vehicle. The thought of leaving the safety of his outpost filled him with fear. But the thought of staying here, Slowly running out of supplies next to his single lentil plant was worse. He had to take a risk. He prepared carefully. He filled a bag with water and food. He took his scanner and a metal pipe he could use as a weapon. He looked at his little plant. "I will be back," he whispered, feeling a little foolish. Then he opened the reinforced door and stepped out into the orange haze day. The air was thick and hard to breathe. He kept his scanner in his hand, watching for any signs of movement. The landscape was a nightmare of gray rock and strange, leafless trees. The silence was the most frightening thing. There was no buzz of insects, no call of birds, only the sound of his own footsteps and the whisper of the toxic wind. He reached the ruins. They were buildings made of a smooth white material, now cracked and stained. They looked like the bones of a giant beast. The scanner led him deeper into the ruins, the ping getting stronger. Suddenly, the scanner screen flashed red. A warning symbol for biomass concentration appeared. He ducked behind a broken wall and peered out. His blood went cold. There were dozens of them. The residuals. They were gathered in a wide courtyard, moving aimlessly. They were different from the ones he saw at a distance. Their bodies were more complete, their movements less shaky. They looked stronger. And in the middle of the courtyard was the source of the signal, a small wrecked vehicle. Its lights were still flickering. He was about to turn back to give up when he heard it. A human voice shouting, "Get back! June, behind you!" Then a crash of metal on bone. Minsu looked towards the sound. On the far side of the courtyard, two people were backed against a wall. A man and a woman. The man was swinging a large wrench, holding off two creatures that were getting too close. The woman was throwing small metal canisters that let out a sharp hissing sound, confusing the others. They were surrounded. They were losing. Minsu's fear vanished, replaced by a sudden clear need to act. He could not let these people die. He looked at the situation not as a fight, but as a structural problem. The residuals were an unstable mass, drawn to the energy of the wrecked vehicle and the noise of the fight. He needed to change the environment. His eyes went to a tall, leaning tower next to the courtyard. It was a communication spire, badly damaged. It looked like it was only standing out of habit. He remembered his engineering classes. Points of failure. He did not have explosives, but he had his scanner and his brain. He ran towards the base of the tower, keeping to the shadows. He scanned the structure. The scanner showed a deep crack running up one side. The integrity was critical. He found a large, heavy piece of broken machinery, a part of an engine. It was heavy, but he could roll it. He put his shoulder against it and pushed, grunting with the effort. He rolled it to the base of the tower, right under the main crack. Then he took his metal pipe. He wedged it into a gap near the crack. He pushed down on it, using it as a lever. It was basic physics. He was putting all his weight on the weakest point. For a moment, nothing happened. Then with a deep groaning sound, the crack widened. The tower began to tilt. It fell slowly at first, then faster, crashing down directly into the middle of the courtyard. The noise was tremendous. The tower smashed onto the wrecked vehicle, silencing its beacon, and crushed a dozen of the residuals under tons of metal and stone. A great cloud of dust filled the air. The remaining creatures were confused, their focus broken. In the chaos, Minsu waved his arms. "Over here!" he yelled. The man and the woman saw him. They did not hesitate. They ran towards him, dodging the disoriented creatures. The man, June, helped one who was limping. "This way, run!" Minsu shouted, and he led them out of the ruins, away from the courtyard and back onto the open plain. They did not stop running until the ruins were a small shape in the distance and his outpost was in sight. They stumbled through the door, and Minsu slammed it shut, putting the crossbar back in place. For a long minute, the three of them just stood there, breathing heavily, covered in dust. The woman was the first to speak. She looked at Minsu, her eyes wide with shock and gratitude. "I am Ji-hyun," she said. "That was incredible." The man, June, nodded. He was big and strong with a quiet face. "I am June, thank you. They had us." Minsu finally found his voice. "I am Minsu." "Are you hurt?" Ji-hyun had a cut on her arm. June had a bruised leg. But they were alive. Minsu got his med kit and gave them water. They sat on the floor of the small outpost, the tension slowly leaving their bodies. "We were kidnapped too," Ji-hyun explained. She was a microbiologist. June was a mechanic. The caretakers had taken them for their skills, just like him. They had been dropped at a different outpost, but it was overrun. They had been running for 2 days. We heard the signal from the wreck, June said. We thought it might be a way to call for help. Or a working transport. It was a trap. Minsu showed them his outpost. He showed them his water reclaimer, his reinforced door. And finally, with a shy pride, he showed them his lentil plant. Ji-hyun stared at the small green sprout. A tear rolled down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. It's alive, she whispered. You made life grow here. It was just a seed, Minsu said. No, Ji-hyun said, looking at him with new respect. It is everything. With 3 of them, the outpost felt different. Less like a prison, more like a shelter. June, with his mechanic's hands, immediately started improving things. He found a broken power cell and, using parts from his own kit, managed to get the outpost's main lights working. The dim room was now filled with a bright, steady light. It felt like a huge victory. He also looked at the air filtration system. This is basic, he grunted. It is just recycling the bad air. It is not making it better. He spent hours tinkering with it using scrap and his own knowledge. Meanwhile, Ji-hyun took Minsu's scanner. She was fascinated by the data. The contamination levels are off the scale, she murmured. It is not a natural poison. It acts like a machine. A very, very small machine. Days turned into a week. The 3 of them fell into a routine. Minsu worked on expanding their food supply, creating a small, sealed growing box for more lentils. June worked on defenses, setting up a perimeter wire that would buzz if anything crossed it. Ji-hyun studied the scanner data. One evening, June called them over to the air system. He had a proud smile on his face. Watch this, he said. He turned a dial. A quiet hum filled the room. A light on the machine turned from red to a soft, steady blue. June held up the scanner. The readout for the air inside the outpost changed. The toxin level dropped dramatically. A new word appeared. Optimal. For the first time since he had arrived, Minsu took a deep, clean breath. The air did not smell like ash and chemicals. It smelled like nothing. It was wonderful. In the clean, bright air, surrounded by his new friends with a small green plant growing in the corner, Minsu felt the feeling from before grow stronger. It was no longer just a purpose. It was a fragile, beautiful thing, like the sprout itself. It was hope. The clean air changed everything. For the first time, Minsu woke up without a headache. The constant low-level nausea he had learned to live with was gone. The bright, steady light from June's repaired system made the outpost feel like a real home, not just a hiding place. Hope was no longer a small, quiet feeling. It was a solid thing in the room, as real as the walls. But Ji-hyun's work with the scanner began to cast a shadow over that hope. She spent her days studying the data, her face growing more serious. One evening, as they ate their simple meal, she put the scanner on the table between them. We have a problem, she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were worried. A big one. Minsu and June looked at her. The good feeling in the room seemed to shrink a little. The sickness here, she began. The caretakers called it a bioweapon. That is not exactly right. It is more like a billion tiny, terrible machines, nanites, she explained. These nanites were programmed to do one thing: break down complex life. They did not just kill. They took apart plants, animals, people, and used the pieces to make more of themselves. The residuals, the zombies, were not really alive. They were just containers. Their bodies were full of these nanites, acting like a hive. The nanites used the bodies to move around, to find more life to consume. That is why they are drawn to energy and movement, Ji-hyun said. They are hunting for fuel. Then she gave them the worst news. She had taken air and soil samples from just outside their door. She had also secretly scanned the 3 of them. The nanites are everywhere, she said. They are in the air we used to breathe. They are in the dust, and they are inside us. The sun was warm on Minsu's back. He knelt in the dirt of a community garden in Busan. His hands, covered in old gardening gloves, carefully pulled out a stubborn weed. He worked with a quiet focus. This was his peace. He was a man who fixed things. He fixed broken irrigation pipes. He fixed patches of soil where nothing would grow. He liked problems he could see and touch. A shadow fell over him. He thought it was a cloud. But when he looked up, the sky was a clear, bright blue. The air above the garden began to shimmer. It was like looking through heat rising from asphalt. Then the shimmer became a solid shape. A large, silent gray disk hung in the air. It made no sound. Minsu froze. His mind could not understand what his eyes were seeing. A beam of pale light shot down from the disk. It surrounded him. He felt a strange pulling sensation. The garden below him, the city, everything fell away. He was lifted into the air, the trowel falling from his hand. The last thing he saw was the green of the plants getting smaller and smaller. Then there was only darkness. He woke up on a cold, flat surface. The air smelled clean and metallic. He was in a white room with no visible doors or windows. The light came from the walls themselves. He sat up, his body aching. A part of him hoped it was a strange dream. A section of the wall vanished without a sound. 3 tall, thin figures walked in. They were very tall, with long limbs and large dark eyes. Their skin was a pale gray. They had no hair. They looked at him without any expression. Min-Su felt a chill. This was not a dream, one of them spoke. Its mouth did not move, but a voice echoed in Min-Su's mind. The words were in Korean, but the voice was flat and without feeling. You are Kim Min-Su. You are a civil engineer and landscaper. You are the correct selection. Who are you? What is this? Min-Su asked, his voice shaky. We are the caretakers. You are on our vessel. We have a task for you, the caretakers explained. They needed his skills. Their world, a planet called Elysium Prime, was dying. A great sickness had swept across it. This sickness was a bioweapon. It killed all the people, all the animals, all the plants. But it did not leave them in peace. The dead did not rest. Their bodies were still moving. They were aggressive. They were driven to destroy any remaining life. The caretakers called them the residual biomass. The planet's heart, a machine called a terraforming core, was failing. The world was turning to dust and poison. The caretakers were advanced. They could travel between stars. They could build great machines. But they could not do what Min-Su did. They could not make life grow. They could not heal the land. They saw this ability in humans. They saw a special talent for making broken ecosystems whole again. You will go to Elysium Prime. You will make the world live again, the lead caretaker said. You kidnapped me for gardening, Min-Su said, a spark of anger cutting through his fear. For restoration. You are a specialist in small-scale practical solutions. Our solutions are too large. They have failed. Yours will not. They offered him no choice. There was no discussion. He was a tool they had collected. They showed him a screen. It displayed a planet. From space it looked beautiful. It was blue and green, but as the image zoomed in, Min-Su saw the truth. The green was a sickly, poisonous color. The blue was stained with great gray scars. Storms of green and black swirled across its surface. It was a corpse of a world. Soon they arrived. The ship was in orbit around the dead planet. The caretakers gave him a bag of supplies. It contained a device they called a terraforming tool. It looked like a thick metal rod. They also gave him a basic survival kit with food packets and water purifiers. They led him to a small round room. A hatch opened in the floor. Below he could see the swirling toxic clouds of Elysium Prime. You will be dropped at a safe location, an outpost. You will begin your work, the caretaker said. Before Min-Su could protest, the floor vanished beneath him. He was falling. He was inside a small pod. The pod shook violently as it plunged through the atmosphere. He held on to his seat, his knuckles white. All he could see through the small window was fire and storm. The landing was hard. The pod crashed into the ground with a jarring thud. For a few minutes, Min-Su just sat there, breathing heavily. He was on an alien world. He was alone. He pushed open the hatch and climbed out. The air hit him first. It was thick and had a smell. It smelled like ash, like chemicals, and like something rotten. The sky was a dull orange, streaked with green clouds. The ground was hard and cracked. In the distance, he could see the skeletons of strange dead trees and the ruins of alien buildings. His pod had landed near a small dome-shaped structure. This was the outpost the caretakers had mentioned. The door slid open as he approached. Inside, it was bare. There was a cot, a small table, and a terminal. The lights were dim. This was his new home. This was where he was supposed to rebuild a world. He put his bag down. The first thing he did was take out his terraforming tool. He did not know how it worked. He pointed it at a small dead patch of alien grass near the door. He pressed a button on the side. A soft blue light came from the end of the tool. It scanned the patch of ground. Symbols he did not understand appeared on a small screen on the tool. Then nothing happened. The ground remained dead. Min-Su sighed. This was impossible. He was one man with a magic stick on a dead planet full of monsters. He felt a crushing wave of hopelessness. But then his eyes fell on his supply bag. He remembered the seed packets inside. The caretakers had included them. They were earth seeds, fast-growing simple plants. He went back inside the outpost. He found an empty container. He filled it with some of the local soil, which was more like gray dust. He took out a single seed. It was a small brown lentil. He pushed it into the soil and added a few drops of his precious clean water. He placed the container under the dim light of the terminal. He had no hope. It was a gesture, a small pointless act of defiance. He spent the next few days learning. He learned how to use the outpost systems to recycle water and air. He used his engineering knowledge to check the structure for weaknesses. He reinforced the door and sealed a crack in the wall with the paste from his kit. He was fixing things. It made him feel a little less afraid. One morning, he went to check on his little container of dirt. He expected to see nothing. But there, in the middle of the gray soil, was a single, tiny, bright green sprout. It was small. It was fragile. But it was alive. It was the first new life on this dead world in a very, very long time. Min-Su stared at it. A feeling warm and strong spread through his chest. It was not hope, not yet. It was something more basic. It was a purpose. He could not rebuild a world. That was a job for gods or for insane people, but he could keep this one small green thing alive. And maybe that was a start. The little green sprout became Min-Su's entire world. He checked on it first thing every morning and last thing before he tried to sleep. He measured its growth a fraction of a millimeter each day. He guarded his water rations fiercely to make sure it had enough. This small piece of earth was fighting to live here, and he would be its soldier. But the dead world was not quiet. At night he heard sounds. They were not the sounds of animals or the wind. They were dragging footsteps and low, scraping noises against the outer walls of his outpost, the residual biomass, the zombies. The caretakers had not been lying. He saw them sometimes during the day, moving in the distance. They were shambling, skeletal figures, their forms twisted and dried out. They moved with a slow, terrible purpose. He knew his little outpost would not protect him forever. He needed to be smarter. He spent his days working on two things: protecting his home and understanding the land, using his terraforming tool and scrap metal from broken equipment near the outpost. He started to build. He was an engineer. He could make things strong. He reinforced the door with a crossbar made from a support strut. He piled rocks and debris into a low wall around the entrance. It was not a fortress, but it was better than nothing. His terraforming tool was confusing. It could scan things and tell him about soil composition and toxins. The screen showed symbols for things like biocontaminant, high, and nutrient level, null. He pointed it at his lentil plant, and it showed a happy green symbol. He called the tool his scanner. It was his only way to understand this new world. They are protecting it, June said, surprised. They are drawn to its energy, but it looks like they are keeping others out. Or keeping something in, Ji-hyun added grimly. They had to get to that door. Min-Su looked at the situation. It was another engineering problem. A very, very big one. We do not fight them, he said, his mind working. We distract them. We lead them away. How? June asked. The rover, Min-Su said. It makes noise and gives off energy. It is the perfect distraction. It was a dangerous plan. June would drive the rover, making as much noise as possible, and lead the horde away from the entrance. Min-Su and Ji-hyun would run for the spire while the path was clear. Then June would circle back and try to join them. June nodded. I can do that, he revved the engine. Get ready to run. Min-Su and Ji-hyun got out. They stood behind a large rock, their hearts pounding. June looked at them, gave a sharp nod, and then drove the rover straight towards the horde. He honked a horn he had built. He flashed the lights. He shouted out the window. The effect was instant. The sea of creatures turned towards the new sound and light. They began to shamble after the rover, a slow, relentless tide. A path opened up to the staircase. Now, Min-Su yelled. He and Ji-hyun ran. They ran faster than they had ever run in their lives. Their legs burned. Their lungs screamed in the thin, toxic air. They did not look back. They reached the bottom of the staircase and started climbing. The residuals on the stairs were slower to react. Min-Su and Ji-hyun pushed past them, shoving the dry, brittle bodies aside. The creatures reached for them with bony fingers, but they were slow. The two humans were a blur of motion and fear. They reached the great archway. The doors were massive, made of a shining metal. They were closed. "Help me," Min-Soo yelled. He pushed against one door. Ji-hyun pushed against the other. For a terrible second, nothing happened. Then, with a deep groaning sound, the great doors began to swing inward. They stumbled through the opening into a vast, dark hall. They turned and pushed the giant doors closed. The sound of the outside world became a dull murmur. They were inside. They had made it. They stood in the darkness, breathing heavily. They had reached the heart. But as their eyes adjusted to the gloom, they saw that they were not alone. The hall was filled with figures. They were standing perfectly still. They were the original inhabitants of the spire, the caretakers who had stayed behind. Their bodies were preserved, but their eyes glowed with a faint green light. They were not feral like the ones outside. They were alert. They were waiting, and now they were turning their heads. Slowly, in perfect unison, they looked towards the two humans who had just broken into their tomb. The air inside the spire was cold and still. It smelled of old metal and dust. The preserved caretakers stood like statues, their pale faces and dark glowing eyes fixed on Min-Soo and Ji-hyun. They did not shamble. They moved with a slow, terrible grace, stepping forward in unison. The silence was more frightening than any noise from outside. "We need to get to the control room," Ji-hyun whispered, her voice trembling. Min-Soo looked around, his engineer's mind fighting through the fear. The hall was huge with a high ceiling. A wide walkway led to a central platform. That had to be the way. But the walkway was lined with the advancing figures. "This way," he said, pulling Ji-hyun to the side. They ran along the edge of the hall, staying away from the main group. The caretakers turned to follow, their movements fluid and coordinated. They were not mindless. They were guarding this place. A door hissed open in the wall ahead of them. More of them stepped out, blocking their path. They were trapped between two groups. Min-Soo saw a bank of control panels along the wall. He slammed his hand on a large red button. Nothing happened. He grabbed his terraforming tool and smashed the screen of the panel. Sparks flew. Suddenly, a section of the floor behind the advancing caretakers retracted, opening a large pit. Several of them fell into the darkness below. It was not a weapon, but it was a distraction. "Run through the gap," he yelled. They sprinted through the opening in the line and onto the central walkway. They could see the control platform now, a circle of light in the center of the dark hall. It was so close. Suddenly, the giant main doors behind them shook with a tremendous boom. The metal bent inward. Another boom, a crack appeared. The doors burst open, and June stood there holding a large metal fuel canister from the rover. He had used it as a battering ram. "Go. I will hold them," he shouted. He swung the heavy canister, knocking back the caretakers who were closest to the door. He was creating a choke point, using his strength to keep them from surrounding Min-Soo and Ji-hyun. With June guarding their backs, Min-Soo and Ji-hyun ran the final distance to the control platform. It was a circle of glowing screens and strange crystalline interfaces. "Upload the code," Min-Soo shouted, standing guard at the edge of the platform. He held his terraforming tool like a club, ready to fight off any that got past June. Ji-hyun didn't waste a second. She pulled the data chip from her neck and looked for a port. The technology was alien, but the principle was the same. She found a slot that looked right and pushed the chip in. A screen lit up. Symbols scrolled across it. A progress bar appeared. It was working, but then a warning flashed. "Error, insufficient power for planet-wide broadcast." Min-Soo's heart sank. They were so close. The core was too damaged. The big, single solution was failing, just as he had predicted. "Min-Soo," Ji-hyun cried. "The system is too weak." He pushed his fear aside. This was his moment. He stepped to the main console. He did not try to understand the alien symbols. He understood systems. He saw energy pathways on the screen. He saw the central core, and the grid lines that spread out from it like a spiderweb. Many of the lines were broken, flashing red. He did not tell the system to fix the whole web. He pointed to the core itself on the map. "Not the whole planet," he said, his fingers flying across the screen. "Just here. Start the broadcast here at the core. Then send the signal through the grid, but only through the pathways that are still working. Let it spread slowly. Let it heal the land around the core first. Then it can spread further as the grid repairs itself." He was not a programmer. He was a gardener. He was planting the cure in one spot, knowing the roots would spread. Ji-hyun understood. She changed the commands, setting the broadcast to a localized propagating wave. The progress bar filled again. This time there was no error. A deep resonant hum filled the spire. The light from the central core grew brighter, changing from a sickly green to a pure, brilliant white. The effect was immediate. The preserved caretakers stopped moving. The green light in their eyes flickered and went out. They stood still for a moment and then crumbled, collapsing into piles of dust and bones. The nanites that had been animating them were dead. Outside, the sea of residuals on the plain began to falter. One by one, they stopped moving and fell to the ground, becoming still and silent. The terrible force that had moved them was gone. June, leaning against his battered canister, watched as the creatures at the door dissolved into dust. He looked at Minsu and Ji-hyun on the platform and gave a tired, triumphant smile. The hum from the core continued. On the large main screen, a map of the planet was displayed. A circle of soft blue light was spreading slowly from their location, pushing back the angry red that represented the nanite infection. The cure was working. The surgery had begun. They had done it. Days later, the three of them stood at the open archway of the spire. The air smelled different. The chemical rotten smell was gone, replaced by the clean scent of rain on stone. The sky was not a healthy blue yet, but the poisonous green clouds had broken apart. Gentle gray rain was falling, washing the dust and ash from the world. Minsu held the container with his lentil plant. He knelt down and carefully opened the lid. He dug a small hole in the soil at the base of the spire steps. It was not gray dust anymore. It was dark and rich. He gently placed the plant into the ground and covered its roots. It was no longer the only life on Elysium Prime. It was the first of many. He stood up and looked out at the quiet, peaceful plain. The monstrous horde was gone. In the distance, he could see the land, clean and waiting. They were still stranded. The caretakers in orbit had not contacted them. But it did not matter. They were no longer prisoners. They were not just survivors. They were the architects of a new dawn. They had been kidnapped to rebuild a dead world, but they had done something more. They had shown that humanity's greatest strength was not its technology or its power, but its stubborn, simple will to make things grow, to heal, to bring life back even when all hope was gone. Minsu, Ji-hyun, and June stood together watching the rain fall on their new world. They had a long way to go, but for the first time the future looked green.